This week on Choice Hacking. It's one of the biggest fails in business history, Blockbuster. You probably think you know the story. An industry leader is destroyed by a shiny new startup called Netflix, who enters the rental market and gobbles up all the customers. But contrary to popular belief, Blockbuster's problems were way bigger than Netflix, and there were some sneaky business and psychology traps that Blockbuster fell into. And you could too. I'm Jennifer Clinehens, and you're listening to Choice Hacking, a podcast about applying behavioral science and psychology to business, marketing, experience design, and more. Join me today as we unpack the psychology behind the $3 billion failure of Blockbuster and how your business can avoid a similar fate. But before we get started, I want to take a few seconds to tell you more about Choice Hacking and who we are. Choice Hacking isn't just a podcast. We also offer online courses, team training, coaching, and consulting to brands of all sizes, including startups, scale-ups, and Fortune 500 brands. We're based out of London and New York and have clients across the US, Canada, Europe, Australia, and more. And some of the amazing clients our team have worked with include brands like Starbucks, McDonald's, T-Mobile, AT&T, O2, Lloyds Bank, and even big ad agencies like Havas and DDB. If you're interested in learning more about how we can help you grow your business with behavioral science, AI, and marketing psychology, visit choicehacking.com to learn more. That's choicehacking.com. Now, on to the show. To understand why Blockbuster failed, we first have to understand why they succeeded. When the first Blockbuster opened in 1985, the video rental business was mostly made up of local mom-and-pop shops that had very limited inventory and usually had a less family-friendly section in the back, if you know what I mean. David Cook, a software engineer and a failed entrepreneur from Texas, saw the competitive landscape and, encouraged by his wife, decided that the rental business needed something new. So he started the first Blockbuster, a totally family-friendly video rental brand that would offer nearly unlimited titles. And because David Cook was an experienced software engineer, he was able to create and manage a huge database of VHS tapes and share those tapes between stores with the use of a centralized distribution center. So it was way easier to have more movies available and get them to people faster. But Blockbuster didn't really take off until a man named Wayne Huizenga started buying up Blockbuster stores. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, that's probably because Wayne Huizenga started a company called Waste Management Inc., a garbage hauling and processing business that he started with a single truck and eventually became a Fortune 500 company that made him a billionaire. As a side note, if you're a golfer, you're probably most familiar with Waste Management Inc. because of its golf tournament, the Waste Management Open, home to what's affectionately called the loudest hole in golf. Huizenga saw the potential in the Blockbuster brand, and he decided to steal McDonald's strategy of rapid expansion and use it in the video industry. Pretty soon, a new Blockbuster video was opening every 24 hours. And for a long time, that model was very successful. Until it wasn't. As much as everyone loved Blockbuster's family-friendly brand and big selection, they hated its late fees with a passion. You rent a VHS tape or a DVD and you bring it back a couple of days late, all of a sudden you owe $10 more after the already expensive rental fee. But Blockbuster's late fees were a big part of their business. In the year 2000, they made $800 million in late fees alone, which was 16% of its total revenue. That's the equivalent of about $1.4 billion in today's dollars, and that's a lot. There's a few psychological principles at play that made customers hate these late fees so much. First, late fees felt unfair. It felt like a loss, and people hate to lose. It's down to a principle called loss aversion, and it says we feel the psychological pain of loss twice as much as the joy of finding, or winning, or watching, or gaining the same thing. But customers' hatred of Blockbuster's late fees went way beyond just feeling like they didn't want to lose a couple of dollars. It was when people were asked to part with that extra cash that made it so painful. There's a fascinating psychological principle driving why Blockbuster customers hated these fees so much. It's called the peak end rule. Now, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, you know I love the peak end rule. I call it the golden rule of psychology-driven marketing. The peak end rule says that people remember or judge an experience based not on the average of every single moment, but on 2 points, the emotional peak and the ending. It wasn't just that there were late fees, it's that they happened at the very end of a Blockbuster experience, so they were particularly powerful, and they were how people were creating a memory or a judgment of Blockbuster, the brand, as a place that charged them expensive and unfair late fees, and they never wanted to go back to again, until they were forced to because Blockbuster had run all of its mom-and-pop competition out of business. Looking back now, we can say, well, why didn't they just charge less or change how they made money? But at the time, Blockbuster just saw that they could make a lot of profit by charging late fees, which, by the way, they knew people hated. But Blockbuster never stopped to think about the psychological effects that late fees had on its customers. They just saw it as a trade-off between happy customers and happy shareholders, which unfortunately is a trade-off any publicly held company has to make. But Blockbuster's real problem was that the shareholders won every single time, and the customers lost. The rapid expansion of Blockbuster was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave them a huge competitive advantage because they had more negotiating power with the studios on where and when movies would be available to rent. It also allowed them to streamline costs and up inventory so customers could find any movie they wanted somewhere within the Blockbuster system. But on the other hand, expansion costs a lot, and that usually means taking on tons of debt. In Blockbuster's case, over $1 billion worth. While most of Blockbuster's expansion happened by buying up competitors, they also started investing upstream in production companies like the Spelling Entertainment Group that produced TV shows like Beverly Hills 90210. And actually, their debt wouldn't have been such a big deal if Blockbuster's revenues had continued to go up. But way before Netflix was even a thought in anyone's head, technology was starting to disrupt Blockbuster's business model. Cable television like HBO and video on demand were gaining ground and a clear threat to Blockbuster's dominance. If customers could just click a button on their TV to watch any movie that they wanted on demand, they didn't really need to go out and drive to Blockbuster to see if the movie they wanted was even in stock. But many of Blockbuster's senior management were confident. You might say they were overconfident. Overconfidence is actually a cognitive bias, an error in thinking, and it describes people's tendency to be a little too optimistic about how smart they are, how secure their business is, and how much the customer loves their brand. It's one of the most dangerous thinking traps any company or leader can fall into, and it comes up a lot in my choice hacking analyses about why companies fail. One person who notably avoided overconfidence was our old friend Wayne Huizenga, who saw the writing on the wall and sold Blockbuster to media conglomerate Viacom in 1994. Meanwhile, in 1997, Netflix was founded by Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph as a DVD by mail rental business. It took them a couple of years to settle on the right business model, eventually landing on a monthly fee for unlimited rentals and, most importantly to our story, no late fees. But contrary to popular belief, Netflix wasn't an immediate hit, and they really struggled for a few years to just survive. By the year 2000, during the dot-com bubble, they were losing a lot of money. So much money that the founders famously approached Blockbuster and offered to sell Netflix for $50 million. Then Blockbuster's CEO, John Antioco, thought that the offer was literally a joke. And most people, whether you realize it or not, probably would have reacted the same way to buying Netflix at the time. It wasn't a profitable business, it didn't have a lot of customers, and most people hadn't even heard of Netflix in the year 2000. So after its rejection, Netflix crawled off to lick its wounds and try to survive on its own. But they would be back. Because in the years that followed, Netflix managed to narrowly avoid going out of business, and against all odds, it found traction and funding. Customers started to resonate with their no late fees message. People started to figure out how much easier and more convenient it was to rent a movie online and have it shipped to your door. Customers got instant gratification that a trip to Blockbuster just couldn't match, and they loved it. And that's not to say that Blockbuster didn't try to adapt. They launched Blockbuster Movie Pass, which was a monthly subscription, and Blockbuster Total Access, which allowed for online subscriptions and in-store DVD exchanges. They even partnered with Enron, yes, that Enron, in the year 2000 to try and create a new streaming service. History might have you believe that Blockbuster was too old and slow to keep up with Netflix, but in reality, when Blockbuster aimed their very considerable resources directly toward destroying Netflix, its co-founder Mark Randolph said that things got, quote, very scary for them. He said, quote, the true strength that the Blockbuster could and that we couldn't match was a blended model of online and stores. They were hurting us, and they were making tremendous gains. So why then did Blockbuster ultimately lose? Well, remember that billion-dollar debt that we talked about earlier? The one that Blockbuster created through its rapid expansion and overconfidence? Well, it came back to bite them when they tried to launch their online competitor to Netflix. Those pesky shareholders didn't like that Blockbuster spent over $200 million to launch Blockbuster Total Access, and were losing $2 for every DVD that customers traded in. Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings told a reporter, if it hadn't been for their debt, they could have killed us. Thank you for listening to the Choice Hacking Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it. It takes me 20 plus hours to create every episode, and it helps the podcast find new listeners when it has more ratings and reviews. And don't forget, you can learn more about behavioral science and psychology applied to business when you subscribe to the free Choice Hacking newsletter. You'll join more than 8,000 brilliant entrepreneurs and marketing folks from companies like Google, Coke, Disney, McDonald's, and Starbucks, but not Blockbuster, who get my newsletter. To sign up, just visit choicehackingIdeas.com. That's choicehackingIdeas.com. Until next time.
I hit record a drop, you can't ignore it. I'm transforming now these cars and planes, I'm always boarding. Just out touring down in Charlotte like I play for